And today is a special interview episode. Gabe, would you like to introduce our special guest for this week?
Yes, we are joined today by the fabulous Andrew Lyter of Lewis, Delaware. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks for having me, Gabe and Sam. I am the fabulous Andrew Lyter of Lewis, Delaware, apparently. I'm here to talk about pilots of the Delaware River and Bay. I live down in Lewis and work for the Lewis Historical Society. So, maritime historian with love of the dirty working class sailors of the Delaware and Philadelphia.
Ooh, I like it. I like it already.
There you have it.
I mean, anything with dirty sailors, I'm there. I'm there. I'm on the docks. I'm in a tutu. Let's go.
Good man.
I suppose we should also explain for our listeners that don't know what the Delaware or Lewis is.
Yes.
That we should go on to explain, as always, that there are areas that people live outside of the city limits of Philadelphia.
They're wrong, but yes, they
yeah,
that's true.
If you stumble 89 miles south on the Delaware via water, you'll stumble upon a sleepy little port town of Lewis.
Last St. Patty's Day, I stumbled 89 miles. It was not good.
Good man.
I did not find myself in Delaware, though. I was lucky.
In circles in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
You're in orbit. Yeah, Lewis is a small port town. Historically, pretty much controlled the mouth of the Delaware River and Bay and has a strong seafaring tradition and very much linked to Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's a lovely, lovely little town and now has a very inconsistently running ferry to Cape May.
Yeah, and we're dredging this winter, I just found out. So big news. Big news down here. First time in 50 years.
You're going to find some cool shit.
Tall ships coming back. That's what it means.
Ooh,
that's cool.
That's fun.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have to go and dig up all of the buried rum that you've been hiding down in the bay. Smuggling
career has failed.
We should start by asking, who were the Delaware River pilots?
Sure. So we're looking at these individuals who were, sailors, mariners, watermen, specifically linked to a region. So pilots, unlike your sailors who are generally transient individuals crossing oceans, these pilots are operating in local waters, and their responsibility is to safely navigate vessels to and from local ports. So the pilots of the Bay and River Delaware historically would have been Lenni Lenape, the Nanacoke, the Sickanese. This evolved into the Swedes and Dutch, and by the 18th century were Englishmen who would safely traverse vessels up and down the Delaware River and the Bay, navigating the hydroscope. So they could read the water, they could knew where buried shoals were, where the channels were, could
where
navigate. Yeah, exactly. The rum is there, but purely with instinct and familiarity with local waters, they were able to navigate vessels safely. And really, we're a critical chain in the greater kind of economic world of Philadelphia. They were the crux that ensured the mercantile vitality of this city and made it a booming port town.
I should say this is one of the really few 18th century trades that has continued up to the current or to the modern day.
Yeah,
because there are still a pretty dedicated group of pilots operating on the Delaware River every single day.
Yeah, they're incredible folks. I've one that I work with on a regular basis, and he is a hardworking, modern day pilot, and it's amazing the links to, the historic trade even up to today.
And now they paint big shark mouths on the front of their boats, which is pretty fun
cool.
To see.
That's awesome.
At least one of the guys in Philly does. I don't know.
Yeah, ours down here is the same.
Oh, okay.
A random aside, I was talking with this pilot friend, and he mentioned the dock workers strike in Philly in the 70s.
Oh, yeah, I've seen some pictures of that.
So I guess during the strike, pilots kind of were I mean, they went around it and were docking their own vessels. And some of these dock workers went and, Molotov cocktails into their headquarters, 22 to the chest of a pilot who had his papers in his breast pocket of his jacket. So he had a 22 bullet lodged in his papers, and then went and navigated a vessel down to Lewis. So this could be a future episode. I'm just throwing it out there.
We're stealing that.
Yep.
And I have surviving individuals who can give us some first person stories there.
That might be another interview episode.
Madness. Anywho, that's a very
awesome.
Yeah, I just heard that story and I was like, "Holy God, this is 100% labor job material."
Prior to that, the only thing I knew about that strike was one picture I saw where during the strike there was a "We're hiring" sign behind the picket line, and they were advertising that you got a hot lunch and free beer, which is the most 70s fucking hiring ad I've ever seen.
What more could one ask for? That's tremendous.
Okay, so the river pilots were mostly, well, because we're focusing on like 1700s.
Yeah, honestly, my era is about 1766 to 1783 is what I would hyper focus on. But these guys, really were operating off tradition that was established in England and elsewhere. Pretty much with pilots boarding a vessel, this would completely upset the traditional power relation between a crew and their captain. And they would take the helm and sort of take over the ship as long as it traverses to its next destination. So it completely inverted all social norms that you traditionally think of on a vessel. As once the pilot boarded, this changed everything. So they weren't exactly... They weren't the most, I don't know. They operated in a really gray area. They weren't part of land-based society, but they weren't a part of that seafaring fraternity that we think of with sailors, crossing the Atlantic and traversing thousands of miles. These guys operated on the coast. It was just kind of this gray area, and they had to form their own bonds, more or less.
Mm-hmm. And they would have been very regional, too. Right.
Certainly, 100%. Look at even today. The pilots that operated on the Delaware River and Bay had essentially three main hubs. You had the Philly-based pilots. You had the Cape May guys who were sort of very different, and then down in Lewis, Delaware, and there's a unofficial neighboring community, Pilot Town, aptly named because it's where the pilots lived historically. It sits right on what's the Lewis Canal today, historically was Lewis Creek, and overlooks the mouth of the bay. So it's these three regions that these pilots would stem from, more or less.
Mm-hmm. I guess we should also point out that especially in 1760s to 80s, that Philly was like the port in North America.
Yeah, the largest in the nation.
Yeah,
the fourth largest or third largest in the British Empire.
Damn.
So bigger than Dublin.
The London of the New World. So
indeed.
So what kind of organization existed for the work that they did? Like, was it just everyone working independently, or were there companies or guilds or?
Sure. I sort of like to look at this pre and post 1766. So pre 1766, you had, it was largely driven by familial relations, community, family. There's period descriptions of it being completely conducted up by competition and nepotism, I think is the quote. And then others described it as crude and clannish. So you had generations of pilots. Even today, you have some pilots who are fifth and sixth generation have served in this same vocation. So it would be organized regionally. But think of a vessel coming into the Delaware Bay. You would raise a signal, and this would be the signal for a pilot to come out and board you to help you come into port, take on water, drop any cargo, and then continue up to Philly. So at this point, you had pilots who would have joint ownership of a vessel. So they'd go out and board this merchant ship. You had individuals who would compete to race out there before the other pilot. And then once you hit Philadelphia, you had Philly pilots doing the exact same thing. So it was really, it was organized regionally, and I think there were undercurrents within this small community, but ultimately it lacked a lot of real cohesion organization. You had traditional apprenticeships still, so think of any other apprenticeship structure, you'd have that amongst the pilots too, but it was sort of regionally driven. Post 1766, things got weird.
What happened in 1766?
Well, thank you for asking, Gabe. That's a great question.
And we're out of time.
So there was a drive amongst the governor of Pennsylvania, a lot of the wealthy ship owners, merchants, to establish some regulations to not only, put some rules in for governing pilotage, but also look at navigation, channel markings, lighthouses, piers, a governing body that could oversee all of this to ensure safer traversing of vessels and ultimately, ensure the economic success of Philadelphia. So 1723, the governor pushed for regulations for pilotage, completely failed. 1733, he again did so and got support from all sorts of ship captains, fell on its face, failed again. 1766, it was successful, and the Board of Wardens for the Port of Philadelphia were officially established. And one of their main, purposes essentially was to govern and oversee and regulate the pilots of the Bay and River Delaware. So this definitely changed the entire scope of, this once autonomous group now fell under the official state regulations of this authority of these port wardens, who were just wealthy merchants, more or less, in Philly. I'll continue to ramble if you'd like. So with this, every pilot, anyone who wanted to operate as a pilot on the Delaware, would come before the port wardens up in Philadelphia, pay a security of 10 shillings. So this is once a year they would do this. And then they would receive a branch. And this would be a first, second, or third rate branch based upon their experience. And this branch was their license to operate as a pilot. Without doing this, they would be going against the law to continue to operate in their own trade. So after you, Gabe.
So even if you were a pilot down in Delaware, you'd have to make the trek up to Philly?
Yep. These are the lower three counties. So the deep south of Delaware still fell under under Pennsylvania. And these pilots were familiar with Philadelphia. There's a number of folks down in Lewis also rented apartments up in Philadelphia and vice versa. They were constantly traversing the Delaware. But so even if you're down in Cape May or Lewis and solely doing vessels up to Reedy Island or Chester, you would go to Philadelphia once a year, pretty much plead your case before this board of wardens, pay 10 shillings, and they would give you your license. And this license would dictate the tonnage of vessel that you were permitted to navigate, as well as the rate of pay. And it really backfired in a bad way. Really bad way. Pilots, you have more experienced pilots. So there were folks who have been doing this for, since the French and Indian War. They were navigating vessels, things like that. They would receive a first-rate branch, but they're going to get paid the same amount no matter what size vessel they navigate. So would you rather navigate a man of war up to Philadelphia or a small schooner up to Chester, Reedy Island, if you're getting paid the same amount? So these guys would gobble up small vessels and get quick paychecks, while you'd have inexperienced or newer pilots who would pretty much be, unable to operate their trade at all. They could not navigate any large vessels, and all the smaller ones were gobbled up by the experienced pilots who wanted a fat paycheck.
This definitely sounds like a policy that was developed in a boardroom.
Indeed, it was. It was the Board of Port Wardens, the dirty Turks. So this, I mean, even the pilots who were financially making out through this were not happy with this regulation. This is an extremely autonomous body of men who are now being told how they can do their job that they've done forever. So this is where we turn to, solidarity and resistance and what came
did they
about
do in response to that?
So you had 60 pilots off the bat. I think it was like 63 of these guys who had agreed and paid the 10 shillings and went through this process. And then with time, they started to see sort of the negatives behind this. And they looked at other ports. They looked internationally, saw what folks were getting compensated, and were not happy. So a large group of them.
Sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
How many pilots roughly were operating in total?
I mean, maybe 75 or so. The vast majority of these guys came before the port wardens and followed suit.
Yeah.
But a few months later, after the port wardens came into effect in November of 1766, pilots gathered together at the Blue Anchor Tavern, which historically, I mean, it moved around a good bit. This would have been right where Penn's Landing is today.
Mm-hmm.
So they gathered at this tavern, and over too many pints decided that they were no longer going to operate under these port wardens. So they drew up articles, and the quote from the port wardens' minutes is, "They had drawn and signed articles to stand by each other in defiance of said law."
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, so
that's fantastic.
And with this, they all agreed that they would not conduct any ship to or from Philadelphia going forward. And this completely, I mean, a few months in, completely challenged the authority of the port wardens of Philadelphia.
And also challenged their pocketbooks because, I mean, Philadelphia as a city ran on trade. So
yeah, I mean, it brought the mercantile trade of Philly to essentially to a standstill. So you're not going to have pilots that are navigating your vessels up the treacherous Delaware. People are hesitant to trade with Philadelphia, hesitant to come up the Delaware. So this really is economically, I mean, disastrous for Philly. So the wardens, their first response was they went and reached out to the Cape May pilots. So Cape May kind of had their own thing going on. These guys weren't operating in the same circles as frequently as Philadelphia and Lewis. But they reached out to the Cape May pilots and asked for them to come up to Philadelphia and conduct vessels during this turbulent time. And they also went to two pilots, both actually based in Lewis, Henry Fisher and Samuel Rowland. And they met with them at the Queen's Head Tavern on Water Street in Philadelphia and pretty much asked these guys to be the vehicles to deliver their message to the other pilots and try to get them to break rank and get back to work. And all the other pilots at this point had left Philadelphia and were gathering down in Chester. I mean, I wouldn't want to gather in Chester now on the waterfront, but apparently, I mean, it was very different then, obviously, and it was outside of the city limits. So these guys were gathered in Chester, and they really continued to just increase their resistance to the port wardens. They agreed to take up arms against any sheriffs and officers that the port wardens sent out. They were armed with cutlasses and swivel guns. Any other vessel that was coming up into Philadelphia, they boarded. So they were in their small pilot vessels, like a whaleboat. They would board these larger ships and haul any pilots off and beg them to join them in resistance, and they did.
Yeah.
And then the most kind of...
Now,
yeah,
you both mentioned cutlasses and swivel guns and that they were begging them.
So
Those two things don't go together.
A few of my favorite things.
Yeah.
And then there's one pilot, Henry Tudor, who I can't remember Simon Finger is the name of the historian. He wrote a great article on this, but Henry Tudor went down to the mouth of the bay, and the direct quotes from the Port Warden's Minute: he cruised the bay in his own boat, flying a flag of defiance at the masthead. Blood red naval standard was at the masthead of his boat, warning that no quarter would be given. So
That's
this
awesome.
guy, he was incredible. So he just went down to the mouth of the Delaware. At any ship that came in, he was the first thing they would see, and he would deal with them accordingly.
This has to be the next Pirates of the Caribbean movie.
It should. It's powerful. And I mean, the blood red standard, you see the same thing. So this is 1766, 1772, I want to say. I might be wrong. Yeah, 72 or 74. There were two big 75. That was the big sailor strike in Liverpool, and all the sailors were wearing blood red. It's described as blood red ribbons in their hats. I mean, it's the same as the red flag of mutiny. Mm-hmm. So this was it sent a message that would have been understood and transcended national boundaries. I mean, both sides of the Atlantic, any vessel would know exactly what this guy is representing. But Fisher and Rowland were able to meet with the pilots down in Chester and get them to come to a meeting with the port wardens to discuss how they could move forward and get them back to work, essentially. The board recognized that they were giving branches below the pilot's experience, and they also recognized, and this is another quote, that it would be sensible that they are a useful set of men that ought to be properly encouraged to perform their duty from inclination rather than frightened to it through fear of punishment. So they,
did the pilots present specific demands, or
they brought before the port wardens economically how their lives looked pre-1766 and post-66. They came before with petitions for better ratings. Especially there was one fellow in Lewis, Nehemiah Field, who's a personal favorite of mine, if you can have a favorite loyalist, but he's a good dude. He came before the port wardens with 13 signatures from other captains saying, my rating's garbage. I need to be paid more for what I do. And they did market research. They brought what other pilots were getting paid. They looked at other ports. And they had a list of these demands, essentially, and they found some common ground with the port wardens, and were able to get back to work for a few years. I mean, for about 7 years before more fun came. But this was the first foray with the port wardens, and they were not trusted really wholly ever. But after this, the port wardens looked down at the pilots in a different way, and my opinion is this really increased their sort of regional solidarity as well, that would continue to grow as the years went on.
Mm-hmm. And this kind of ties into at least some of the other research I've been looking at in terms of the working class in Philly itself, that in this period you were starting to see a little bit more consciousness among more so the lower sort, or not the lower sort, but the mechanics in Philly, of the like all the tradespeople, and that scared the merchant class to no end.
100%. I mean, it's that same spirit of radicalism. This was just their form of adopting it. I mean, and as you guys both know, I mean, both sides of the Atlantic, this was a wave of kind of workers' rights and resistance was rising with the strikes in England. I mean, you had massive strikes in 1772. Later in 1768, there was the big sailor strike and coal heaver strike in London that just had ramifications across the Atlantic. So this was, I mean, it was a call to action. But after this, I guess it's not really a strike yet, is it? Was the first official strike they claim was the 1768 in London, but this armed resistance of sorts. I think it really increased the solidarity and sort of the curmudgeonliness nature of these pilots. I mean, they really pulled back a bit and doubled down on their entire outlook.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 1766 for you.
I guess you can sort of say that they won that.
Oh, definitely.
What was the next battle there?
So I guess next up, I would look at, it wasn't necessarily a battle. I throw it on my timeline of pilot resistance, but look at it as sort of a moment of increased solidarity amongst the pilots was Philly's response to the Boston Tea Party. So 1773 with the tea ship Polly. The pilots were threatened with I'll say threatened. They were forcefully given a handbill from the Committee of Tarring and Feathering of Philadelphia. And this handbill addressed...
A committee that should come back.
Yes, agreed. And it addressed the Delaware pilots and with strong language encouraged them to prevent any tea ship from being brought to Philadelphia. Philly needed to stand in line with Boston, and they knew that the only way a tea ship would reach the city was with the help of a pilot. And they really tried to they tried to play into the pilot's hand. They called them a free, honest, and hardy class, and they knew what strong, upstanding citizens they were, and they needed their help with this. And they then finished the handbill by threatening to tar and feather any pilot that brought the ship to the city. And the pilots... So the pilots stood united in this, and they all refused. I mean, Philly pilots, Lewis pilots, Cape May pilots all refused to bring any vessel up to the city. And they actually boarded the pilot, or the tea ship Polly. It was Captain Ayres. And they boarded it, and he thought they were going to navigate him up to Philadelphia. They handed him a letter from the Committee of Tarring and Feathering saying, "Sorry, buddy, this isn't happening. And if you get up there, you're going to be in deep shit." So the ship turned back. So they sort of acted together and got this vessel to turn away. But I mean, the next, after you guys. Sorry, Gabe.
Oh, no. That's a fair enough decision to
certainly
not be tarred and feathered.
100%. I mean, and really when things then turned, and I mean, with the rest of the soon-to-be nation, 1775, the Pennsylvania Committee of Safety passed really onerous resolutions out of sheer paranoia, rightfully so, that the British Navy was going to seek out Delaware pilots to navigate their vessels. And they were 100% correct in this. They had every reason to be suspicious because this would happen time and time again. But the committee passed resolutions to prevent pilots from bringing any ship in. Their official verbiage was, "All pilots of the Bay and River Delaware ought to lay up their boats on or before the 20th of September and cautiously avoid going on any navigable waters or other place on land or water where they may probably fall within the power of British men of war, armed vessels or boats, or within the power of men landed from such."
Is basically just a self-imposed embargo.
100%. That's exactly what it was. So, hey guys, we know that we put dreadful, onerous restrictions on your trade 9 years ago. We know you had our backs in 1773, but 2 years have passed, and we're going to completely rip away your ability to put bread on your table. So, good luck. Thank you. Thank you for your support, and stand by us. This is going to work out.
And I assume that there was no compensation or anything built into that. Just
nope, not at all. Not at all.
That sounds right.
They then threatened them, of course, too. So those who refuse to comply, and I quote, "They shall proof thereof made to this board be deemed an enemy to American liberty, a traitor to his country, and such published and held forth to the public."
But we will still contribute to your 401k.
Yes, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
403B if you're a nonprofit, you know. It's,
Yeah.
so this really, I mean, I think at this point, these individuals really felt a firm sense of betrayal. They're 9 years into this new relationship, this new, I mean, power struggle more or less, and they completely turned their backs on the pilots without any resolution for providing a means of income for these men. So immediately in response, you had the Philly pilots submitted a petition to the Pennsylvania Committee of Safety. I mean, rather than just submitting complaints, they submitted a petition with solutions and really laid out beautifully how they could make this work. The petition threw a little bit of mud at the pilots of Cape Penelope and Lewis and Cape May, claiming that they were giving preferential treatment as they could pilot any vessel that came into the bay up to Philadelphia before the Philly pilots could get there. But they also claimed that many amongst their rank found themselves destitute of their usual means of obtaining support for themselves and their family, with their only business being piloting, which is very accurate. They put forth a resolution to allow these men to go out oystering. They asked if they could take over one of the Committee of Safety boats and get paid for patrolling the bay and the river. They laid out a series of options, and this all fell on deaf ears, and they were all denied.
Was there any evidence of them turning to smuggling?
Oh, yeah, they were smuggling this whole time. I mean, they've been smuggling since their inception. All those floating barrels of buried rum, I mean, they were smuggling. They were historically smuggling up and down the Delaware. That was the side hustle for all of these individuals.
That one of my favorite quotes from it was one of the documents that led to the creation of the Coast Guard was the collector of customs in Philadelphia complaining that the Delaware River had so many small tributaries and inlets that it was nigh impossible to actually enforce any kind of maritime law because all these pilots would just duck into a river and disappear.
Yeah. I mean, it's perfect. And I mean, who better knows the local waterway, the local shoals, can read the tides than the pilots. So, I mean, it's a natural sort of extension of their main trade. But I mean, so the Philly pilots threw this petition in. 7 days later, the pilots in Lewis did the exact same thing. So, and each of these petitions, I mean, the Philadelphia petition was signed by over 20 pilots operating out of Philly. The Lewis one was signed by all the Lewis pilots. And of course, Lewis pleaded with the committee and argued that the Philly pilots were favored. And said, pilots belonging to Cape Henlopen have laid up their boats and are determined not to break through them if you'll make the pilots of Philadelphia do the same, for it's very hard to see your pilots come down and take the bread from their mouths.
It's good to know that the Philly-Delaware rivalry predates the country. So
Indeed. Predates the statehood of Delaware, too. It's
Yep.
lovely. But both petitions were completely denied and ignored. So they threw these guys in a pretty terrible situation and offered absolutely no compensation or no means of providing for them. And at this point, I mean, this is really, I mean, what leads to, obviously, the revolution is the next step, but all of these pilots are seeking out other outlets and how they can leverage their skills. You had a number of pilots. Henry Fisher, who was the Lewis pilot, who was the scab and got everybody to go back to work. He worked and became the Committee of Safety's eyes and ears on the Delaware. And he was responsible for 13 alarm stations up and down the Delaware River and wrote really annoying little letters to the Committee of Safety every day if a ship came in the bay or if he heard somebody with a Cockney accent. His ghost will haunt me. And then you had others. I mean, this fellow Daniel Murphy, he worked for the Pennsylvania Navy and, I mean, crewed a ship. You had a lot of guys that turned to privateering. 10 pilots were blessed to become chevaux de frise pilots and navigate vessels to and through the chevaux de frise. But you had a ton of pilots who were I mean, really played up to their dirtbag marginal status, and they were opportunistic. And to me, like resisting the revolution was it was their ultimate form of resistance. They were constantly betrayed by the Pennsylvania Committee of Safety, the Port Wardens of Philadelphia. So when the opportunity
Mhm.
presented itself, they turned to the Royal Navy. And the Eagle was Howe's flagship. After Philadelphia was taken, once the Eagle arrived, she had something like 44 pilots on her muster book. And all of these guys are from Philly, Lewis, Cape May. Um, it's incredible. There was a mass exodus, but
Huh.
curiously, I mean, they still sort of stuck together. I mean, would flee together with their neighbors and the same guys that they had worked alongside. Uh, it was pretty wild, but I
Well, I
mean,
mean,
yeah,
it. If you think about it, the Royal Navy is the only like guaranteed paycheck that they've got at this point,
of
because
course.
the Committee of Safety is going to arrest you if you try and pilot a ship, and then maybe like 5 or 6 of them could get gigs working for the Committee of Safety.
Yeah, you had every alarm station, all of the ones in Sussex County and most of the ones in Kent were manned by pilots, Delaware pilots.
Okay.
And the Committee of Safety came down to inspect these alarm stations, and most of the pilots were absent on their station, would hire a man to take their boat, and they were found at the tavern. I mean, they did a terrible job, really, and I don't blame them. You had Henry Fisher was, I mean, the most honest pilot of all of them, but they had no other option. I mean, and looking at, March 25th, 1776, from them forward, you had at least 3 Royal Navy vessels parked on the Delaware Bay. So this is your playground, and you have the enemies posting up at the mouth of your playground. Are you going to continue to try to operate in a vocation that no one has your back, and you have really crappy legislation that says you can't do your job? Or the Royal Navy, I mean, they were offering to pay pilots more than they were making prior to their arrival. They would pay them half up front, half upon arrival. They brought them on the ship's books. A number of these guys were promoted to mids and lieutenants. I mean,
Wow.
it's a no-brainer. I hate to say, if you don't let, Star Spangled happiness get in the way, it makes sense. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
I mean, you have the opportunity. I mean, there wasn't that much opportunity for prize money, but theoretically,
Oh, certainly.
you could make some cash. So,
And I mean, pilots were at their core. I mean, what ultimately all they wanted to maintain autonomy over their profession, and they wanted the highest profits possible, and they wanted equal opportunity. So even when they wrote these petitions, I mean, to the Pennsylvania Committee of Safety, and were throwing mud at the pilots of Philly or the pilots of Lewis, they just wanted the same chance to put bread on their table. That was it. I mean, so with its basic human needs, and if they cannot find them in their own country, I mean, it's their own future country. It makes sense to me. And they were all over the place. I mean, in the Revolution, you had they were more fun to research than any other seafarer during the Revolution. I have this one fellow I'm chasing out, John Eames. He was a Philly sailor who had a third-rate pilot license. In 75, he boarded the Sea Nymph, just a merchant ship, went down to St. Eustatia, trying to bring back black powder and everything that we were hungry for. Got captured on the way down there, was put on the Roebuck after going up to Boston, deserted from the Roebuck at Gwynn's Island, made his way back to Philly, hopped on another vessel, another merchant ship, was captured. Then he ended up joining the Mermaid's crew. They were driven ashore by the French off the Delaware Bay in 1777, was a prisoner again, and then he was to be banned from the country and I think flogged something ridiculous, like 450 times.
Jesus.
And then it was dropped completely. But I mean, it's every single one of these guys has a story that elaborate, and they're pretty wild to chase out. And they flip flop sides. I mean, with the wind, they're an incredible group of laborers.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a dirty obsession. I mean, it's Rabbit Hole City, but it's fun.
That's most things on this program. Just Rabbit Hole City.
Yeah.
It's the way forward.
It's not healthy.
Not at all.
It's fun, though.
100%.
So what happened, I guess not after the revolution, but after the occupation of Philly and after Howe's fleet left?
I mean, you had plenty of pilots who continue to be good dudes and operate under the auspice of the port wardens and the Committee of Safety. Henry Fisher was one who he rose to prominence through the revolution and immediately was able to get back to work. So I'd say, I mean, it was a clean split almost with half the pilots I've chased out. I've looked at, really honed in on Lewis especially. Half of them went to the British and the other half stayed loyal ultimately and were able to find other work, be it working in the Pennsylvania Navy, working for the Committee of Safety, working as an alarm station pilot, a privateer, and they found their way back and continued to operate in their vocation. And I guess just could swallow their pride and were, I mean, part of that group that saw the greater vision for this country, I suppose. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to throw my self in with a lot of loyalist pilots who did pretty wild stuff. They had more of an adventure, definitely.
You had said there were other actions in 81.
Oh, the other, yeah, I've not fleshed that out completely, but
okay.
Following the revolution, I think it was 86, 85 or 86, there was another bout of issues with the port warden structure continued after we became a nation and after Delaware became its own state. But there was another bout of resistance to legislation at that level and to pretty much another attack on the autonomy of pilots.
Yeah.
And this really, I mean, curiously, 1888 was when the Pilots Association was officially founded. 1888. So you had close to 100-year run of this really unusual, unsteady relationship with the Port of Philadelphia, the port wardens, and these committees of safety. And most scholarship out there looks at the pilots began in 1888. Before that, there was nothing there. It was they were just a mess.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really 1888 on, pilotage adopted a different face. It became, I don't want to, watch, a board member is going to listen to this, but it became an extension of the yacht club. Like, it was a lot of the founders of the association were the wealthy landed elite. It was no longer the working class mariners of these port communities who just were trying to work in their same old vocation.
Yeah.
So, but that's not an era I like to dabble in. I like the dirt bags of the 18th century better.
Oh yeah.
There are people.
They're much more fun.
Indeed.
Because they submit nicely worded demands with a very strongly worded threat at the end.
They do. I mean, it's great. This is a very random aside. I've last night was going down a rabbit hole on one Lewis pilot, and this fellow ended up. He was on the Roebuck, off the Roebuck. He was captured 3 times. By the 1780s, he had some small 34-foot whaleboat that he was operating as a privateer. And he and I think he had 11 crew members on his boat. They each were armed with 2 Sea Service pistols each and a Sea Service musket with a swivel gun. And they took 16 vessels and captured 60 sailors, American sailors.
Jesus.
The one night, it was off Egg Harbor, New Jersey. They went to take this Pennsylvania Navy schooner and realized it was much larger than them. They didn't stand a chance. So the quote is, he found good company with the crew and spent the night with them. So I guess they drank, had a good evening. And then he waited for them to leave, and they captured him the following day. And this fellow went up to Nova Scotia and just became a pilot up there after the revolution was over. But it's stories like that. They were opportunistic at their core. And that's a trait that existed throughout their entire career, and even one could argue even today. I mean, they're maritime laborers that aren't loved by the maritime community and aren't loved by the terrestrial land-based community. So it's an odd group.
That's really cool, though.
Yeah, it's fun.
And yeah, there. If nothing else, there needs to be a movie about them capturing a ship by going out drinking with the crew.
Oh, it's phenomenal. I mean, that's my current rabbit hole. I'm really diving down in a bad way. I'll share more once I find it with you.
I don't really have any other questions. That was fascinating.
It was a rambling session. I apologize.
Oh no.
No, that's what this is.
I'm a rambling man.
I was enthralled and didn't want to interrupt, so
I was it was too interesting to interrupt.
Yeah.
I didn't swear at all, so that's good. Or bad, I don't know. Did I let them down? Their legacy is failing. Oh God.
I'm sure they were quite foul of tongue. So
Oh, certainly. I hope.
You must forcibly overtake our podcast and tar and feather us now
yes.
to make up for it.
Mother may I.
Well, thank you for this lovely interview, and
Sure. Thank you, guys.
I look forward to hearing about whatever other insane stories you dredge up.
Yeah, I'm looking at. I'll keep you guys in the loop. We're still recording, but I'm looking to do like an oral history. This is professional, real life oral history interviews with active and past maritime laborers of the Delaware. And we're looking to start this at work, and I want to dip into some of these old timer pilots while we still have them around, and get some of their stories on like the 70s dock worker strike and things like that. So
Cool.
I'll certainly share all the fun tales with you guys.
Please do, but
Yeah,
but that's
definitely.
professional real life as opposed to this podcast where it's bullshitting in the Matrix. Okay, so
But is bullshit in the Matrix professional real life too?
I mean,
Hmm.
Sam, you and I technically get paid a very small amount to do this, so
That's
we
professional
are
real life
professionals.
then. It's the blue pill.
I took the yellow pill. I don't know.
That's
I just
an
gotta-
option for me.
I just have to pee all the time. What the hell?
It's fish oil. It's
Something's
good.
wrong with my prostate.
Talk to Gabe about that.
Gabe.
I just took an antacid. I don't know what you guys are doing.
Acid.
I have an antacid as well. It's the way forward.
We're old. Shit.
Yes, correct.
All right. Well, thank you for this, and
Yeah, thanks, guys.
look forward to hearing more about it.
Aye. Talk to you soon, fellas. Thank you.